3 more days. The floorboard outside our bedroom door has always creaked on the third step from the left, and I have never once fixed it, because that creak has saved my life more times than I can count. Though I didn't know it yet, not on the night everything started, not until I stood frozen in the hallway at 11:47 p.m. and heard my wife whisper the sentence that would end the man I used to be. 3 more days, Melissa said, her voice so soft I almost mistook it for the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Then everything will be mine. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. The phone was pressed to her ear. The bedroom door opened just a crack blue light from her screen, painting the side of her face in a color I'd never seen on her before. Not warmth, not love, something colder, something calculating. No, he still doesn't suspect anything, she continued, and there was a small laugh in her voice, private and pleased, the kind of laugh she used to save for inside jokes between the two of us. Daniel's exactly where I want him. Sweet, trusting, oblivious Daniel. My name in her mouth had always sounded like an anchor. That night, it sounded like an accusation. I backed away from the door so carefully that I didn't even let my weight settle on the creaking board, an old defensive habit I'd developed over 11 years of marriage, without ever needing it for anything more sinister than avoiding an argument about who left the dishes in the sink. I went downstairs, sat in the dark of our living room, and stared at the wedding photo on the mantel until my eyes burned. 3 more days. Then everything will be mine. I am not by nature a paranoid man. I'm an actuary. I spend my professional life quantifying risk, calculating the statistical likelihood of bad things happening to good people, and until that moment, I would have told you the probability of my own wife plotting against me was so close to 0, it wasn't worth modeling. But numbers don't lie, and neither, apparently, did the $200,000 life insurance policy I'd taken out 18 months ago, back when Melissa had cried real tears convincing me it was the responsible thing to do for our future. I went back over that conversation in the dark, replaying it with new eyes. We're not getting any younger, Daniel. What if something happened to you? I'd want to be taken care of. At the time it had felt like love. Now it felt like the opening move of a chess game I hadn't known I was playing. I didn't sleep. When Melissa came down the next morning in her robe, humming, kissing my cheek, asking if I wanted eggs, I smiled and said yes, and something inside my chest turned to ice while my face performed the routine of an ordinary Tuesday. Day 1. I called in sick to work, which I never do, and instead drove to the storage unit we kept 2 towns over full of my late father's things, mostly tools and photo albums neither of us had gotten around to sorting. It was the only place I could think of that Melissa had no reason to check, no reason to wonder why my car was gone for hours. I sat on an overturned crate surrounded by my father's ghost and made a list, the way I make every list, with columns and a clear head, because that's the only kind of head I know how to use when the world stops making sense. Column 1, what do I actually know? Not much, a whispered sentence, a timeline, 3 days, a tone of voice that had chilled me to the bone. Column 2, what could everything mean? The house, worth around $400,000 after our renovations. My retirement accounts, which had grown healthier than either of us liked to admit out loud, a habit of modesty from 2 people who'd both grown up with parents who counted pennies. The life insurance policy. My mother's ring, which I'd inherited and which Melissa had always seemed to resent slightly, though she'd never said so directly. I'd only noticed the way her jaw tightened whenever I mentioned it. Column 3, who was she talking to? That was the part that kept circling back, sharp-edged, refusing to settle. The tone hadn't been the tone of a woman talking to her sister or a friend. It had been intimate, conspiratorial, the tone you use with someone you trust completely, someone who is with you in something. I thought of Bradley Chen. Bradley worked with Melissa at the insurance brokerage. Of course it was an insurance brokerage. A detail so on the nose it felt almost cruel, like the universe had decided to make my humiliation thematically consistent. He'd been to our house for company parties. He was younger than both of us, divorced, the kind of handsome that photographed better than it aged, and I had once made a joke at a barbecue about how he probably had women lining up, and Melissa had laughed a half-second too long. I hadn't thought about that laugh in over a year. Now it was the only thing I could think about. I drove home that evening with a plan already forming, though I didn't yet know it was a plan. It felt more like survival instinct wearing the clothes of logic. I would watch, I would listen. I would not, under any circumstances, let her know that I knew. Day 2. Melissa left for work at 8:15, same as always, and I waited exactly 11 minutes, long enough that she wouldn't double back for a forgotten phone charger, before I went into her closet and did something I am not proud of and would not have believed myself capable of 48 hours earlier. I went through her things. Not violently, not even messily. I have always been careful, methodical, and that morning those qualities that had made me good at my job made me terrifyingly good at this too. Beneath a stack of sweaters in the back corner of her closet, behind the shoeboxes she thought I never looked in, I found a manila folder. Inside it, printouts, bank statements from an account I didn't recognize, opened 4 months ago in her name only. A balance that had been growing steadily, small transfers, $2,000 and $3,000 at a time, siphoned quietly enough that I never would have noticed a corresponding dip in our joint accounts, because she'd been pulling from her own paycheck, redirecting money that should have gone toward our shared expenses into something private, something hers. And a printed email chain between Melissa and Bradley. My hands were shaking so hard I had to set the folder down on the bed to keep reading it. It has to be clean, Bradley had written. No mistakes. We only get one shot at this, and if it goes wrong we lose everything, not just the money. I know, Melissa had written back. I've been planning this for months. 3 more days and it's done. Daniel won't see it coming, he never does. I read that last line 4 times, he never does. Not cruel exactly, worse than cruel. Certain, the casual, bone-deep certainty of someone who has decided, somewhere along the way, that you are a fool. And has built an entire plan around the safety of that assumption. I photographed every page with my phone, put the folder back exactly as I'd found it, straightened the sweaters, and sat on the edge of our bed for a long time, feeling something crack open inside my chest that I didn't have a name for yet. It wasn't quite grief. It wasn't quite rage. It was the specific, disorienting vertigo of realizing that the floor you've been standing on for 11 years was never solid at all. That night at dinner, Melissa asked me how my day had been, and I told her fine, quiet, a little boring, and she smiled and reached across the table to squeeze my hand, and I let her, because I needed her to keep believing what she believed. I needed one more day. You've seemed a little off lately, she said, studying my face with an attentiveness that under different circumstances I would have called love. Everything okay at work? Just tired, I said, been having trouble sleeping. Well, she said, and there was something underneath the word, something I now understood to be listening for. You should get some rest. Big things coming up. I asked what she meant. Oh, nothing, she said too quickly, and smiled the smile I used to think was my favorite thing in the world. Just, life, things change. I went to bed that night beside a woman I had loved since I was 26 years old, and I lay awake counting the rhythm of her breathing, trying to determine whether she slept the sleep of someone at peace, or the shallow, watchful sleep of someone waiting. Day 3. Here is the part where, if this were a different kind of story, I would tell you I confronted her. I would tell you there was a screaming match, a dramatic unraveling, plates thrown, the truth spilling out across our kitchen tile in jagged pieces. But I am an actuary. I do not deal in drama. I deal in probability, in contingency, in the quiet management of risk before it metastasizes into catastrophe. And so instead, on the 3rd day, I did something else. I called my cousin Marcus, who is a detective with the county sheriff's department, and who I had not spoken to in almost a year beyond the obligatory holiday text, because our families had drifted the way families do. I told him everything. The whispered phone call, the bank account, the email chain, Bradley Chen's name, said out loud for the first time since the barbecue joke, tasting like a small, bitter stone in my mouth. Marcus was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Daniel, he said finally, I need you to understand something. What you're describing, a life insurance policy, a secret account, an affair, and a countdown, that's not just a marriage falling apart. That's a pattern. I've seen it before. I need you to be very careful for the next few days. Don't be alone with her if you can help it. Don't eat or drink anything you didn't prepare yourself. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to keep you alive long enough for us to figure out what's actually happening. I hadn't let myself think the word alive in relation to any of this until he said it out loud, and once he did, I couldn't unthink it. $200,000. A countdown, he never does. Marcus told me he'd start quietly looking into the account and into Bradley, using channels that wouldn't tip anyone off, and that I should go about my evening exactly as normal, and call him immediately, if anything felt wrong. I hung up the phone in the parking lot of a grocery store I'd driven to for no reason except that I needed somewhere neutral to sit, and I put my forehead against the steering wheel and allowed myself, for the first time in 3 days, to cry. That evening Melissa suggested we open a bottle of wine, to celebrate, she said, and my whole body went cold at the word. Celebrate what? I asked, keeping my voice light, keeping my hands steady around the glass she'd already poured for me before I could refuse it. Just us, she said, being us. I feel like we haven't really connected in a while and I want to fix that. I didn't drink the wine. I lifted the glass to my lips and let it touch them and set it back down and talked instead, filling the silence with a long, meandering story about a client dispute at work, watching her face for any flicker of impatience, any tell. She listened, nodded, laughed in the right places, and eventually, when I excused myself to the bathroom, I poured the wine down the sink of the guest bath and refilled the glass with water from the tap, the same pale gold color under the kitchen light, and no one but me would ever know the difference. Nothing happened. My heart was hammering so hard I thought she must be able to hear it, but the evening passed in ordinary domestic rhythm, dishes, television, her head eventually resting on my shoulder during a show neither of us was really watching, and I told myself that whatever was coming, it wasn't coming tonight in this kitchen in this glass. I was wrong about where, I was right that it was coming. The third night. At 2 a.m. I woke to an empty bed. I lay still for a moment, orienting myself in the dark, and then I heard it, her voice low, coming from downstairs, that same conspiratorial murmur I'd first heard 3 nights ago. I got up. I did not creak the third step. I stood at the top of the stairs and listened. "Tomorrow first thing," Melissa was saying. "The lawyer's office opens at 9. Bradley, I need you to be there. This is really happening." The lawyer's office. I felt the floor tilt beneath me in an entirely new direction. "I know you're nervous," she continued, "but Daniel doesn't suspect a thing, I promise you. He thinks everything is completely normal. In 3 days, this whole nightmare of a company will finally be out of Richard's hands and back where it belongs, with us. Dad would be so proud of what we built to make this happen." I sat down on the top step, my legs simply giving out from under me, relief and confusion crashing into each other so violently, I nearly laughed out loud. Richard, her stepfather, the man who had spent the last 3 years slowly running her late father's company, the small but respected architectural firm her father had built from nothing and left in trust for her, into the ground through sheer incompetence and self-dealing, siphoning contracts to his golf buddies, nearly bankrupting a business that had once employed 40 people. Melissa had been fighting a quiet legal battle for over a year to have him removed as trustee, and the company returned to her control, a fight she had shielded me from almost entirely, because I understood now, sitting on that step in the dark, she'd been terrified of jinxing it, terrified of hopping out loud. Bradley wasn't her lover. Bradley was a corporate attorney she'd hired privately, using money she'd been quietly saving from her own paycheck for months so that I, with my careful actuary's brain and my careful actuary's worry, wouldn't spend a year lying awake calculating the odds of losing a legal battle against her stepfather's expensive lawyers. She hadn't been hiding an affair. She'd been hiding a fight she was terrified of losing, protecting me from her own fear the way I had spent 3 days protecting myself from a threat that had never existed. 3 more days, then everything will be mine. Not my life, her father's company, her inheritance, reclaimed at last from a man who'd stolen it out from under her. I don't know how long I sat on those stairs, long enough that my legs went numb, long enough to feel every ounce of the last 3 days, the storage unit, the closet, Marcus's warning, the wine poured down the sink, collapse into something that was almost funny and almost unbearable at exactly the same time. When Melissa came back up the stairs, phone in hand, she found me sitting there in the dark and stopped, startled. "Daniel, what are you doing up?" I looked at her, really looked, the way I hadn't let myself in 3 days, past the fear I'd built around her like a wall, and I said the only true thing I had left. "I heard you," I said, 3 nights ago. "I heard you say 3 more days, then everything will be mine, and I thought," my voice broke, "I thought you were planning to kill me." Her face went through something complicated, shock, then something like horror, and then, unexpectedly, tears. She sat down on the step beside me and put her head in her hands. "Oh, Daniel," she said, "I didn't want to tell you until it was real. I didn't want you to watch me lose again." She looked up at me, eyes red. "I was talking about the company, about Richard. The judge is ruling Thursday. I've been so scared to hope I couldn't even say it to your face." I told her everything then, the whisper, the storage unit, the folder in her closet, Marcus, the wine, and watched her expression shift from confusion to disbelief, to something that might have been the strangest kind of tenderness I'd ever seen, grief and love braided together. "You thought I was going to poison you," she said finally, half a laugh, half a sob, "over a company that's been giving me ulcers for a year." "I thought a lot of things," I said. "None of them were fair to you." We sat on those stairs until the sky outside the hall window started to lighten, and I told her about Bradley Chen and the barbecue joke, and she laughed so hard she cried again, this time for an entirely different reason, and admitted that yes, she'd hired an actual Bradley Chen as her attorney purely because the coincidence had made her laugh when she found his firm's listing. A small, private joke she'd never gotten to share with me because sharing it would have meant explaining everything else. 3 days later, sitting beside her in a courtroom I hadn't known existed until that week, I watched a judge return her father's company to her name, watched 11 years of quiet burden lift visibly off her shoulders, and understood that the thing I had spent 3 days preparing to lose was never in danger at all, except from the part of me that had let fear write a story faster than truth ever could. That night we didn't celebrate with wine. We sat on the back porch with 2 glasses of water, laughing until it hurt, and I told her I never wanted to hide anything from her again, and she said the same, and for the first time since I'd stood frozen in that hallway, I let the 3rd stair creak beneath my foot on purpose, just to hear it, just to know that some things in this house were exactly what they'd always been.